Hang on, I forgot to unmute you there. So go ahead, do your
Oh
opening again.
no, I had so much good things to say. I said, good morning, everyone. I always wanted to be a teacher so I could say that every day to my students. Hey, how are you doing today, Lou? Sounds
So
like,
far, so good. I'm fighting a cold, as I told you before the show. So I'm fighting a cold a little bit here.
yeah, there's a lot of things going around. It's very strange. I've had 3 different friends and family members that their young kids have that, I don't know what they call it, but it's like foot and mouth thing.
What?
Yeah,
Hoof
I
and
think it's
mouth?
called, I don't know if it's called thrush. I don't know, but it's
Yeah.
like a infection in the mouth and it's on the hands and feet too. It's kind of a strange thing. And I don't know, kids seem to get that when they go to daycare. That's my son never had it, as far as I know.
Yeah.
But it's not uncommon.
Okay,
Yeah.
that doesn't sound like fun at all.
Doesn't sound fun for the parents because it's miserable for the kids.
Oh,
I think it itches and it's uncomfortable type of thing. Yeah.
yeah.
But
We skipped the lice and we skipped that with the 2 kids. I didn't get any of that going on.
exactly.
Yeah.
So do you have a nice Thanksgiving?
I did. Had a very nice Thanksgiving, kind of low key.
Yeah.
And watched a lot of football, which was the goal. So
Right.
it was a nice
Football's a
fun
good
Thanksgiving.
thing.
Yep.
That's good. That's good.
Yep.
Well, today on Make Up or Break Up, we are going to be having some fun. And I say fun because I think people need to put fun back into dysfunctionality. We all walk around kind of dysfunctionally operating the best we can. We don't necessarily have any tips and tricks from anybody. We're just winging it, right?
Yep.
I mean, come on, that's what life's all about to a certain degree. But you and I have talked a lot about my marriage repair work and how I differ from, a traditional counselor setting. And we've talked about how with my clients, it's engaging, it's positive. They want to come every week. They're excited to brag about the homework that they got done. It always cracks me up. There's always one person that's like, look, I did more than her. But it's important to cover some of the positive things, on the show, which we do with a lot of our tips and things like that. A lot of it is we talk about releasing ourselves from these pressures, right?
Right.
And figuring out what is the best strategy, not just for ourselves, but when we're talking in terms of couples, even if someone's dating, what is the best strategy for a survival mode that's positive and flourishing as opposed to like feeling stressed and unheard. And so today we're going to deviate a little bit from some of our past topics. And I'm going to have my guest speaker come on in a couple of minutes. My guest, who's a fellow marriage coach. And she has a lot of the same basic, values, and her moral compass is like mine and yours, which is hard to find. I hate to tell you, but in case you haven't figured that out.
Yeah.
It's hard to find people that have a moral compass that they can take from their personal lives and then bring it into their work. And that's really what she and I do in our jobs. And it's kind of cool because it's like, I know it's a phrase that's already been taken, but East meets West. So she's on the West Coast in Southern California, and I'm out here in the Boston area. And we were introduced because we have such similar values. Someone that we know introduced us and said, hey, you guys should get together and maybe do some collaborating. And early on, when we first met, probably several months ago, we started to think in that first meeting about how can we collaborate. And we really focused on the collaboration would be how can we deliver some positive messages for people who are struggling in their marriages. And as a result of that, even though I'm having her on today in early December, we're really talking to some positive tips and tricks on how to improve a marriage, but we're also going to be encouraging people to learn more and to share about our upcoming online webinar seminar, which will be in January. Before I forget to say the date, it's Wednesday, January 19th. And we're asking people to pre-register. We want to have a small group so that it's intimate, because I don't know if you've done a lot of these online things, but when you get like 50 people on a Zoom,
Yeah.
I mean, it's beyond Hollywood Squares. But Hollywood Squares is a TV show I always loved because there were like 9 or 12 people, but you could focus, right?
Yep.
and it wasn't too overwhelming. In fact, it was kind of a good mix of different personalities, and there were men and women. And that's kind of what we're trying to achieve. We're hoping that we can cut it off around, 10, 12 people. And for an overflow, we can do something, a week or two later. But we're really excited about this because everything we're going to be talking about is positive. Like, take these issues, we're going to tell you how to turn it around and make it better. So with that being said, keep January 19th in your brains, and we're going to start promoting it more. And so we're going to ask people to share the Facebook ads on it and stuff like that.
Okay, great. And where can they get information on it currently?
And what?
Where can they get information on it currently?
Right now, we haven't really posted a lot about it. I know Katrina has. I know she's been sharing it a little bit, but I don't think it's been as public. So we're going to put it out on Facebook.
Okay, great.
But we're excited about it. And, two heads are better than one. It's going to be so exciting because most people don't have multiple speakers. But we just have, like I said, we have the same core values in life and the same moral compass, which allows us to work really well together. And it's like, we're like a wingman for each other. Like sometimes she says something and I'm like, oh my goodness, I was just about to say that. That was my idea. But why don't we bring her on? Her name is Katrina Session, and she is from the West Coast out in California. Hey, Katrina.
Hi, Judith. Hi, Lou. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, we're excited to see you at
Wonderful.
8 a.m. in the wee hours.
You're almost to lunch.
That's right. Well, hey, before we get started on the topics that we were thinking of covering today, why don't you tell people a little bit about yourself? They already know who I am, but, Coach Judith here. But tell them about what you do, where you're located, and, your favorite stuff about what you do.
Okay, great. So I am in Southern California. I'm between Los Angeles and San Diego, but close to the mountains. And one of my favorite things about Southern California, of course, is the beach. And I try to go as much as I can. And I began this work long ago. I've been married over 30 years. And in those 30 years, I've been involved with marriage and couples and wives in all forms and facets. So a student, a facilitator, a teacher, speaker, everything except an author. And I just have a heart for people who are married. You don't get married to be miserable, right?
Well, theoretically. Yeah.
Nobody
good theory right there.
Yeah, nobody walks down the aisle saying, I'm going to be miserable. So I was running into a lot of unhappy wives, and I was spending a lot of time talking to them, and just, just had a heart for them. And really my big passion through all of this, wives and all of that, is that divorce is difficult on children. And no matter what anybody says, I've seen it over and over and over. And so if I can save, one or two marriages in my lifetime, that would be wonderful. So that's my big passion. And I know, things happen, but that's my passion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is hard. And it's interesting that you said that, Katrina, because I find that the myth buster is when I tell people your 32-year-old could be going through things and you don't even know it because they're mature enough to not show it, right? A 2 or 3-year-old is going to show it. I mean, they can't help themselves. They just can't. And the older kids can learn to stuff it down and not show it. But if they're still in your household, you will see how it comes out. During a divorce, teenagers, everybody thinks, oh, teenagers are always quiet and they go to their rooms and they just tune out on YouTube or, get onto Facebook for 5 hours. But the reality is that can be confusing because someone going through a divorce, like you said, those kids are still affected. And while you think they're just a normal teenager who went up to their room for 5 hours, they're still suffering. You're just not seeing it because they're there for 5 hours and they're using the video games and things, honestly, to cheer them up more than they even did before. So it's not like they take up video games because of a divorce, but they will tend to find more satisfaction from it because it takes them out of their head, So I really appreciate your approach to it. And I agree. It's really hard for kids. And I always tell people, if it does get to that point, can you honestly stand there and tell your kids you did everything you could? And a lot of times we didn't, right? And that's the pivotal part of it. And that's the shame of it. And, I have been divorced, unfortunately. And I honestly, I'm very transparent. I tell people, look, I share like the pros and cons of my first marriage. And that's kind of like the thing I have to live with, because I didn't have someone like you or me in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I was talking about this earlier today to a client. I said, the difference is the traditional counseling, it's difficult. It's difficult because it's often, it takes so long, and the people don't get as personal as we can as a coach. We can share our personal stories because we don't have that restriction. But when you go to a therapist after a while, you sometimes think, hey, do they really get it? And you look at them and you're like, they look like they're the perfect person. They always dress nicely. And it's really hard to get your marriage back on track when you feel like you're sitting with a perfect person
Mm-hmm.
and they're not allowed to tell you their stories. So you just feel like, all right, so like, here I am telling all this stuff. But I love the ideas that you and I came up with for collaborating. And today in particular, I loved how we were able to hone down some ideas. And we're going to talk about the top 5 things every spouse can do now to improve their marriage by 25% or more. Now, if that doesn't grab people, I don't know what would. And you're the one that came up with it. I'm like, 25%. Now, is that a guarantee? Do I get a refund or anything?
No.
So why don't you start talking a little bit about that and move into like our first one about, we talked about hope and things.
Yes. So Judith and I wanted to come on before the holidays. And if you're having trouble in your marriage, just let you know there's hope, and don't despair. And, as Judith says, and we hear all the time, this too shall pass. But in the meantime, we want to give you some hope. So that's how we want to start.
Exactly. And it's interesting because I think that's such an important point that we're starting with that, because when people are struggling in their marriage, they're often struggling privately.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, most of the people I meet, they're not even, this is going to blow people's minds because they're like, that doesn't sound right. They don't even tell their best friend that their marriage isn't great, that there's problems in their marriage. And so why is that? Because they don't have the hope. They don't think that Jane's going to change. They think Jane's just Jane and I'm stuck. And so there's no hope in that. Or they think Bill's never going to change. So, what do you say to that when someone's like, I just feel hopeless. I don't feel like how could it possibly change? Because I think it's important to instill some kind of hope with people, or they're not going to want to move forward, right? So what do you usually say to people when they say that? Because they're like, it's gone,
I think a lot of it is that they think that they're the only one. Because they're not sharing, they feel isolated, and you have your blinders on, so you think, oh, everyone else's marriage is wonderful. Just look at Facebook.
I know.
It's
like they all look great on Facebook.
Exactly.
Right.
So just sharing stories and really trying to get to the meat of what really is causing the unhappiness. And so
Right.
We'll be discussing some of those things as we go along. The other 4 points will cover some of those reasons why there could be hopelessness in the marriage.
Right.
And is it on both sides or is it on one side?
Mm-hmm.
Those kinds of things.
Yeah. I also think what I usually tell my clients is the hope comes from trusting with my background and my expertise and my testimonies for people who have made it.
Mhm.
And sometimes people, they look around and like all over the news, they see all these people that didn't make it. So of course they don't have any hope, right?
Mhm.
And especially with the movie stars and everybody, it's like, who's marrying who, who's leaving who. I can't even keep up with some of these movie stars. I just can't. And you see that all day long in the media because that's what we get fed.
Mhm.
And you start to feel like, yeah, well, at least they're rich. They can make it. I'm stuck and I'm hopeless. I can't really do anything. But that's not true. And I think it's important for us to be able to share stories, even if it's without the actual names, that
Right.
we share stories of people who you would never think could have made it. And, and they made it. So let's talk about the second thing is once we sort of establish the fact that we can give people some hope. And I think what you said was good, reminding people that nothing stays the same. This too shall pass. And I mean, it's impossible for like a week or a month later for it to be exactly the same, especially if they take some of our advice and they move with some change, then it's automatically not the same. Right. But let's talk about the respect and things. That's kind of an interesting point right there because people are like, yeah, that's a hard one right there. If they're feeling like they're not in love anymore.
Right. One more thing. I'm sorry. I wanted to say on the hope and despair. It's what are you telling yourself? What are you saying every day? This is never going to get better. Are you saying, I'm going to do my best to make my marriage work. I am not going to give up on my marriage. What are you telling yourself? So that's another reason for the hope versus despair. The other thing is, who are you around? Are you around anybody with a good marriage? Do you have any role models? So if you're around a bunch of people who, have toxic marriages, then it's going to be difficult for you to see yourself in a happy marriage. So sorry, I just wanted to put that in.
No, that's a really good point because sometimes, misery loves company.
Yeah.
And, there's nothing worse than, four guys getting together at a bar, having a couple of beers and watching a football game and talking about their spouses. It's like, there's nothing really positive coming out of that whole conversation when they get negative like that. Right. You're right about the role model. I mean, surround yourself with some friends who have good marriages and look at what they do. Ask them like, wow, like what's the secret? Not that it's a secret, but what is your secret to your success? Like, how do you do that? Like, how do you, because there may be some tips some things that they do, which is usually understanding that there's ups and downs and just, probably jumping ahead to like other parts of our stuff here, but chances are the successful ones are doing some of the next 4 points.
Absolutely. Right? Absolutely. And how I would probably start off the responsibility and respect section is just a little analogy. So if you saw in the corner of your bedroom smoke, would you turn off the light, turn over and go to sleep and just leave it there?
Probably not.
No, of course not. And
lose not depends.
So somebody has to take responsibility and get up and check on that smoke. The same with our marriages. Somebody has to address the proverbial elephant in the room.
Right.
And so I think a lot of times, well, I'll wait for him to talk about it. I'll wait for her to talk about it. And then it's months later and you're sweeping these things under the carpet, as they say, and then it blows up. And then you wonder, what happened? All I said was, I don't want to do that today. They lit into me. And what did I do?
Let me take on your example here. And Katrina, I'll start with you because you can tell me if I'm wrong. I think the basic issue here that's so discouraging for people is that if there's smoke in the corner of the room, both of you have a similar motivation to find out what it is and to protect yourselves. In relationships, oftentimes the conflict comes from you're doing different priorities. You're looking at different things, and your hopelessness comes from the fact you can't change your partner, or you're having trouble changing your partner or getting your partner to see your perspective and what your needs are and things like that. How do we address those changes? Because that's where the hopelessness comes from, because it's at certain points in a relationship, you guys aren't looking for the same things. You're not on the same page. Your priorities are different.
One of the things about that is, especially for women, I'm going to be stereotypical. You cannot change. You cannot change your husband. There's no way. You just can't. And so that's where some of the hopelessness comes in, because they've spent so much time trying to change him instead of appreciating his values and the things that made you get married in the first place. And so some of the other things that you could look towards is, of course, this is not going to go over well, but changing yourself. So
people don't like that one.
No, they don't like that one. So, but if we use a physics analogy, for every action, there's a reaction. So I'll use like a mom and a child. So the child knows that if they do something wrong, all the mom's going to do is yell. So what do? Just keep doing it, because all she's going to do is yell. So, but if the mom stops yelling and gets in little Johnny's face and tells him don't do that anymore, then she's going to get a different reaction. So that's the same with marriage. If you just keep doing the same thing over and over, then you're not going to get a different reaction. And sometimes we, okay, I'm going to be stereotypical again. Men assume what the wife wants, and I can give a good example of that. So my husband and I were going someplace, and so he turns the heat on in the car. Well, why is he doing that? To make it warm for me. Well, I'm not cold. But he didn't ask me. He just did it.
Yeah.
So, if you don't have a good relationship, that could turn into a big argument.
Yeah. And, it is interesting, because what you're really talking about is that expression, be the change. And a lot of times I ask my clients, my married clients, let's write down, let's not word it as negatives. Let's word it as weaknesses. What are the weaknesses of your spouse? Where are the areas that you think they just fall down completely in the marriage? And let's make that list. And then let's look at what would the opposite be of that? So that's basically like the cons list, right? But instead of looking at the pros of the other person, I say, let's not go there yet. Let's look at the cons and write down what the opposite is. So like, the opposite of, being disrespectful with, lots of profanity and name calling and things like that. The opposite would be saying nice things. And exactly what you said, if you start to really emulate the nice things, eventually the other person is usually going to temper things a little bit. Right. But it's all in like it, and what your delivery is, in the sense of, like you said, a reaction and a reaction. But, and I don't know what Lou would say to this, but for example, I don't feel like we always have to react. So even though it's a physics thing, I can react, but I can keep it to myself.
Yeah.
Not all my reactions are verbalized to my husband. I don't always go, not that he can't sense it, but because he's really good now at like the body language and stuff. I'm like, oh man, I'm gonna have to move to something new here, because he's like, I know what you're thinking. I'm like, no, you don't. He goes, yeah, I do. I'm like, oh no.
But I'll tell you that's a good personal life lesson as well. Even outside of the relationship, you do not have to confront everything.
You don't.
Right.
Your life will be better. You'll be more peaceful. You'll be happier. Sometimes it's just, and by the way, react if you want to, don't vocalize it, especially to the person, or don't give it any energy. It's just the way that it is, and go on. Again, and my girlfriend, I wish I could tell her this all the time, because she confronts everything. And it's like, you don't have to confront everything. You can let some stuff go. You can just keep walking.
Absolutely. Good point.
Yeah. And I think, Katrina would probably agree with this. And it's not a pro or a con. I'm just saying it's just a thing. But when people are like that, I call that hyper vigilant. Overly sensitive is what other people would call it, but I call it hyper vigilant. And what it means is, in the past, she wasn't validated. So now she feels like she has to be validated with everything. Someone at some point said to her, you know what, your problem is you never speak up. Like, you just go along, you never speak up. And so usually at a certain point, we tend to go too far the other way, right? So first, we can be the ones that we don't speak up. We just simmer about it privately. But then when we start to speak up, we kind of go like, like cuckoo. And there's nothing wrong with that to a certain degree when they're sharpening that skill, because we have to practice something a lot before it becomes more of a natural. And then we should sort of settle down into like, okay, now I feel comfortable speaking up and being assertive, which is really the right word. And when I feel safe and nurtured, I don't have to. When I know that the person's intentions aren't the same way, aren't what I'm thinking, that what I used to think they were, I can kind of relax a little bit and not be like that.
Right.
So it might take time in past relationships, you know. But it's interesting because when Katrina and I were coming up with the second point, it was responsibility and respect, and how we react is we can choose to be more respectful. Not that we're not going to blow up all the time. We don't want to be overly idealistic, but even a respectful person would go back 20 minutes later and say, no offense. I'm sorry. I was short tempered. The whole topic just got me going. It just triggered me or whatever it was, just really got my goat. But that's, but again, that's a maturity thing. And people that don't have a lot of experience with a relationship, that doesn't come naturally in the first year of a marriage or dating. It takes time to cull these tools, I guess I would say. But I mean,
I think people have to understand that they have different they handle conflict differently.
yeah.
Right.
Me saying, don't be an idiot about that is a different thing than telling me don't be an idiot about that. It's just, sometimes, and some people will get into a conflict and they'll say something like that and it lands hard on the other person. And
That's right.
You think just because it doesn't land hard on you, or it's hyperbole and you just, it's not even kidding, but you're just kind of, that's the way you engage in a conflict situation. You have to understand how it lands for other people. And, someone might say, don't be an idiot, and then just go on. But that person hears idiot because that's what they heard in their childhood all the time, or that's their personality hits them really hard. It lasts with them for days, and people don't understand that.
So true.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right.
And that leads us into our next topic of positive communication.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was excited to get to that one. Yeah.
So we've been touching on that a little bit here.
Mhm.
So, Judith talked about, profanity and cursing at each other. And, I think that it's a trend. It's a terrible trend, but
Mhm.
it's so prevalent in our society today that's how people talk to each other all day long.
Mhm.
And just like Lou said, at some point, maybe, the husband is on construction and he uses that language all the time. And so he brings it home and then directs it towards his wife, and she dishes it back, but she's really hurting inside. But he doesn't know it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Right.
it's just that I just think that's something that between husband and wife that really, shouldn't use profanity, especially in addressing the other person.
And in effective conflict, if I can use that term, in effective conflict, you're doing, when you use language like that, or you're inflammatory in your discussion and exchange with the other person, you're doing exactly what you don't want to do, which is moving the argument. Because if you say, don't be an idiot about that, all of a sudden the conflict is about you calling her an idiot as opposed to the original thing that you're trying to deal with. So, try not to move the argument. Try not to open a separate front on this argument. Just stay on the subject that you're trying to deal with.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Absolutely.
I think focusing on, if we take a couple of minutes or we take a couple of breaths or we leave the room and then come back, if we can focus on the positive, because, these 5 things that every spouse can do to improve their marriage, it's so simple, but it doesn't come naturally because we naturally want to say, like even like this morning out of the blue, I don't even know when they came, like this morning, maybe, I don't know. But I was downstairs before the show grabbing my cup of Joe, not because it rhymes, but just because I got it. And my husband's like, oh, hey, those shelves came in. So things are so screwed up and backed up lately with like everything that, like, we went to Home Depot and Lowe's and they couldn't cut us some shelves. They had to send away for the shelves. It was kind of weird. I'm like, really? Because they have the wood and they have saws, but whatever. So we had to wait for like 3 or 4 weeks for these shelves. So he says to me, hey, I got the shelves. And I saw out of the corner of my eye, I'm like, oh, the large cabinet doors were open, and I'm like, so I had to immediately think of something positive to say, because I wanted to say, okay, well, don't do it without me, because that is how I felt. And then I almost said, well, we should do it tonight. And I'm thinking to myself, he's going to be like, I don't want to do it at 10 o'clock because I have clients until 10 tonight. So he's going to be like, so I'm like, oh, I got to find out. I'm like, well, I'm free at 5. So if you want to try to do it at 5, that would be great, because I'd like to do it together. But I had to watch how I worded it, because I wanted to say, well, don't do it because I might not like the way you put so much room for the jars, because then that just because not to be a control freak, but I am a little bit. And we're going to utilize these 3 new shelves, man. I want to have the jars have no extra room, I'm like,
Right.
I have that. But I wouldn't be surprised if I go down there at 5 and it's already done. I'll just have to live with it. I'm like, all right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, what do we call that, Lou? Right? What kind of moment is that? Is it?
Yeah. And is what it is moment.
No, Lou always says when you look at these situations, you have to say to yourself,
Oh,
is
what's more important? The relationship.
what's more
or the
important?
issue?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think if more people stopped and said that,
Mhm.
we wouldn't have so much conflict, because sometimes it's about ego and not about the relationship.
But the problem is with some people and their relationship with conflict is that at the moment, the issue is more important. If they, in a calm
Mhm.
moment, when they reevaluate or they're sitting there a week later, they say, well, I really shouldn't have gone that hard on that thing. But just the way they approach conflict, the way they deal with this type of thing, at the moment, all that matters is, that the shelves are spaced properly.
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right.
So in the moment, you lose sight of it, and that's all it takes. And then words are exchanged. And again, it's gone from shelves, which shouldn't be a high profile, high death conflict
Yep. Shouldn't be.
in a marriage, but it all of a sudden names went back and forth, and harsh words were spoken, and it
Yes.
lingers.
Mhm.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It seems to be lots of small things that we have to make our choices over, right? They're not,
Mhm.
it's not always the real big things.
Yeah, so one of the other things I say to my clients is be above the offended wife. So, don't be so sensitive. Don't get so offended about every single thing that your husband does or says, or take it in. Oh, he did that because he doesn't love me. Oh, he did that to irritate me. Oh, so you can really just get yourself all twisted up by being offended about everything.
Right. Well, and sometimes whatever those small things are, if you're going to start the positive conversation, I always like to start the positive with thinking of something in the general vicinity that I can say positively. So, at Thanksgiving, when we were cooking for Thanksgiving, my husband was feeling like, I forget what it was, but he thought of some side dish that he had wanted, but he never mentioned it. So he just remembered it. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not, in my mind, I'm like, it's not going to happen. It's like 11 p.m. the night before, not happening. Even if the store was open, not going out and making another dish. But I turned it around by speaking to him, because words of affirmation is his love language. So I was like, look, you know what? And it was only 3 of us, by the way. So that's made it even funnier. I'm like, there is so much great food here. And all that work you put into the mashed potatoes, because mashed potatoes are a pain in the butt. I'm sorry, but I used to always get assigned the mashed potatoes. I'm like, really? And then I got scalloped potatoes. I'm like, oh, that was worse. I should have said the mashed potatoes. Scalloped potatoes always ended up moving in my car at a stop sign, and I'd get the sloshy milk cream stuff all over the back of my car. So I have this fear of potatoes now. I'm just not doing potatoes anymore. But he makes these really great potatoes, and he looks for new recipes. I'm like, honestly, look, I don't want to offend you or anything, because the other 3 dishes are great. But the only thing my mom's going to talk about, I am telling you right now, at the dinner table, you watch. I said, she's going to the potatoes are going to knock her socks off. And then comes the turkey. And sure enough, because we're just potato people, I don't know, because we're Irish or something, but we love potatoes. Anyway, we love potatoes. And so he calmed down and he felt better about it. And he's like, and then I just said, look, let's put it on the list for Christmas.
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm.
But that could have gone sideways, because he was starting to get kind of worked up over it, because he likes to sort of he enjoys cooking, and then he loves people enjoying the cooking.
Mhm.
So he had this really good idea. I don't even remember what it was, but I'm like, that's just, yeah, we don't have any of those things, so it's not happening. But
That's
you know, sort of putting a positive spin like on other things that he'd made.
Katrina, I want to go back to your statement about women being offended. And I think a lot of times, and it will be stereotypical here because we can do
That's
it with all
okay.
the relationships.
And we can.
I think a lot of times women get offended because they personalize the actions of their husbands or their partner. In other words, the husband or partner will not do something that he's supposed to do or do something he's not supposed to do. And there are consequences for the woman, and she automatically takes it as an intentional act. It's like, or if they're going to be generous about it, what they'll say is he just doesn't care because he doesn't understand this consequence. And, you know, the guy, I tell Judith this all the time, guys are dogs. And I don't mean this in a pejorative way. We're really simple creatures, right? So if we don't do something or we do something, it's not because we're thinking 4 moves down the road, it's going to, you know, cause your sinuses to flare up and you're going to be miserable and things like that. We're just not thinking that way. We're certainly not doing it intentionally. And it's not that we don't care, but women tend to personalize that. I think, generally speaking, you can tell me if I'm wrong. But I think keeping intent in mind is important to avoid really intense conflict, because if you know, he just didn't do something. He didn't intend to hurt you. It's not that he doesn't care. It's just he's a guy.
That's exactly right, Lou.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Very well stated. Yes. Because, you know, women, they can have 5 to 10 things going on. And, you know, the man usually only one. And that is really true. If he's watching a football game, he does not hear you. He just doesn't.
Right. And no offense, he just doesn't care.
He doesn't hear you.
Right. And you know, when sometimes they can be dismissive, but really it's like, I'm so into this football game, like, no offense. It's like, I'm not trying to be dismissive, like when you have the argument later, but dip or no dip. Because, you know, the one thing we all hate to hear is whatever. It's like, no, I'm asking, do you want the chips? Do you want the cheese doodles? Do you want the carrot sticks and the hummus? And you know, when you go, it doesn't matter. I don't care. That drives my husband nuts because he's like, okay, I'm just asking which one, you know, like which one? And I'm like, I don't care. And, you know, you just have to get to the point where you have to understand each other. And, you know, really in a way, like, wouldn't it be nice to have somebody that says they don't care? Right. But we take that as dismissive, like, and really it's like, yeah, I really don't. Like, I'll eat anything right now, you know? But I do that all the time. And I know I'm starting to learn now, after 8 years, my husband really wants an answer. And I really don't care. It can be a chicken thigh. It can be a chicken breast. It can be a burger. I love burgers. That's fine. But he wants to know, like, which one do I want? And I'm like,
Funny. That's usually gender reversed. And
Exactly.
The way it usually shows up is in you know, going out to dinner. Where do you want to eat? I don't care. I really don't care. And then not only that's one of the things that women oftentimes look at as, you know, when you say you don't care where we're eating, you don't care about her. And it's like, no, I just don't care where we're eating.
right. I literally could go Chinese or Italian.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, we should move into the fourth one, which is another good one. And now that we've talked about being respectful and having positive communication, I know it's hard, but, you know, take a few seconds to think of a positive spin on what you're about to say. But the fourth one we have here, which everyone can do, is understand that love is an action, but you're not waiting for it back. And so do you want to talk a little bit about that, Katrina?
Well, you know, I have this thing I always have to go back, but one thing I wanted to bring up is, with positive communication, is don't play with each other. Don't play games. Don't try to manipulate. You know, don't try to bully. Don't be demanding. So that's one of the other things that, you know, for positive communication. So just thought I better stick that in. So yes, love is an action. And, you know, we always have this, you know, I don't feel in love anymore. I don't feel, but it's an action. And so we can stoke up those love flames by being thoughtful, thankful, kind, gentle, all of those things to be in love again. And so it is an action. You have to do something, and waiting for the other person, you know, may not work.
Right. Well, I think exactly. And I mean, when you say love is an action, it's like, it's literally like, it's a verb, right? It's
Mhm.
like it's not a thing. Love's not a noun. It's not just a word. It's not just a thing that people assume is a descriptive of a relationship. It's doing things. And I know sometimes people get upset about that. They're like, well, why should I have to do things? It's like, well, because positive begets positive, right?
Mhm.
If you're going to keep sitting there and doing nothing, if you expect the other person can get to the point where they just sit back and say, I've already done enough. Now I'm going to sit back. And now you have two people at an impasse,
Mhm.
right? And doing for someone else doesn't have to be difficult, but I do want to talk a little bit about the love languages. And what I love about the love languages, and I just had this conversation the other day with a client because she thought she was being pretty intuitive on everything. But I said to her, okay, so the problem is when you take the test on the love languages, the test is your love language. And what you need to do is educate those around you, whether it's your kids, your spouse, even your coworkers. Let them know in some way what your love language is. And that might even be for a spouse that has words of affirmation. I might, if that were mine, which it isn't, and I might say to my husband, after he gives me a compliment, then I would let him know that I really like that. And that speaks to me. I'd say, wow, I really appreciate you like noticing that. That really made a lot. Thanks for saying it. Because sometimes I don't know like if you like notice those things and so that tells him I don't have to go into the whole book about the 5 love languages, but I can let him know like, that really meant a lot to me. I just really love hearing from you that you like the way I orchestrated the family dinner or that, that you appreciate whatever, how I, made some extra stuff. I mean, I am sort of describing like basic things, but a lot of our things do sort of circle around dinners, housework, chores, errands, light, like for me, like, because I get migraines, I don't like bright lights, but he loves bright colors. I mean, we are pretty opposite in that. He likes bright colors and he likes bright lights. And, he's the first one to throw the shades up. And I'm like, whoa, that's like, and I tend to like more subdued lighting and even the colors. Like, this is the only room so far that he hasn't been able to touch, but I don't know. Colors coming soon. Look out, everybody. I'm like, you're not doing it. You're not doing it. But,
Judith, on the flip side, you're also, you want to notice if you don't know their love language, you can still pick it up. We'll keep with the food thing. The wife has worked all day putting the food out and has it just so, and it's beautiful. And then, the husband doesn't say anything.
They don't notice. That sucks.
And
French.
she's just crushed,
right.
Because acts of service, she likes serving. That's what she does. Or
right.
you can do it on the other side where the husband is, he's working 8, 10, 12 hours a day. And, he's bringing home the bacon, as they say, and he's, so proud of himself. And, all the wife does is complain about him not doing chores when he gets home, or, wanting to go places and do things. And he's, and just not being happy. And he's like, well, I don't know what else to do. I'm working as hard as I can. I've provided this nice house and income and everything. I think I'm doing everything. So that can really just be a very difficult situation if you all aren't able to talk about the two different things.
Yeah.
Because, and the other thing is if you get into personalities, which we don't have time to do, the one personality, they think that everybody's like them. And they just can't understand why everybody's not like them.
Right. So. Well, and that's why it's so important. I teach my clients about the love languages because I say every day you need to hit their love language. So this client of mine thought that the love language meant they were describing their own, but they thought that doing that when they talked about the things that they did for their spouse, I'm like, okay, so the problem is that's not her love language. That's yours. So gifts, that was his. Like gifts is a big thing, but gifts doesn't mean like you're buying somebody like a new bathrobe every week, right? But gifts as small things. It could even be like, hey, I noticed that you needed a new hammer out in the toolbox, or, or I noticed that, if they had a hobby like fishing and stuff, that they didn't have any good lures left, or I'm just like making it up, but that's a gift. It's an act of service, but it's an actual gift. So like when acts of service is my love language. So like when my husband, like sometimes he'll come up on a Zoom call and he comes in with the coffee and I'm like, don't walk around, because he's so on Zoom. Like he hates technology and some of his meetings are on Zoom and he's like, oh, I can't stand this. I have no volume. I'm like, doink, there it is. You just unmute yourself.
Yep.
He's like, great. Everybody just saw my wife come on and unmute me. But I'm like, all right, because I do Zoom all day. He doesn't. But like when he brings me a cup of coffee, like that's one of the examples. Like that is like such a great but small action, right? So you want to talk about some of those. It doesn't have to be a big action, right? Like what are some of the other things that you were thinking of, Katrina, for like love actions?
Well, some of the other things is, again, if your husband is getting up early and has a long day, if you're packing his lunch, put in an extra sandwich and just say, oh, I put an extra sandwich in because I know you're working late tonight. And, just things like that, just niceties. It doesn't have to, take a lot of time or a lot of thought, but just those kinds of things. And, the regular stuff, saying hello like you would to someone else in the morning. Good night, please, thank you. Those are niceties and showing love. Other things are sometimes wives are upset. Oh, he doesn't want to hold my hand. Well, did you ask him? It's not that he doesn't want to hold your hand. I had to do that. Because he want to hold my hand. That's not that I don't want to. It's just not something I think about.
Yep.
You're free to hold my hand. I don't mind. So, isn't that something?
Right.
So,
yeah.
Men are simple creatures. We really are.
Yep.
I mean, for me, it's a bag of pirate booty. I just bring home pirate booty.
You can't have like just a few pieces of that.
Yeah, but it's a simple thing. Is like I was out, I went to the store, I was thinking of you, I got you pirate booty, brought you home.
Right.
It's as simple as that.
Exactly. For my husband, it would be butter toffee peanuts.
Yeah.
Whoa. Whoa, now you're talking.
Smiling from ear to ear.
That is good stuff. Yep, exactly. So, and again, we're talking about some small, simple, positive things that you can do for your marriage. And as Katrina likes to say, improve your marriage by 25% or more. That's right.
It's like a Black Friday sale.
Yeah, right. That's right. I like, it's like a cyber. This is like a cyber special. Did she bounce out?
I think she bounced out for a second.
How'd that happen?
We'll hang out a while, see if she comes back.
All right. Was she in the green room now?
No. Something happened. She got disconnected or something.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, it's funny. There's this meme. There's these memes floating around of some of you all haven't done this, and it shows that type of thing. For me, recently, it's been some of you all have never been in a team sport, and it shows. People don't know how to be teams nowadays, and in relationships, sometimes it's tough because that has to be a team environment. You have to give up for the other person a little bit. You have to be. Here you go. Katrina's back.
Here we go.
Yeah. Oh, lost her again. You have to be. You have to play a team sport in a relationship, and a lot of people who haven't been in a team situation don't understand that a lot of times. And again, this is where you take a front. I don't know. See, the thing is, for me in a relationship, there's got to be that safety aspect for me. That's the most important thing for me. It's like, all right, I didn't do something, I screwed up, and you're not happy about it, but it's, you don't think less of me because of it. You don't belittle me because of it. You don't get angry at me because of it. You understand my intent wasn't to screw up. Right.
Right. Well, and love being a positive action is certainly not, like you said, belittling or belaboring an issue. Move on. Like once you've had a discussion, it's like I always tell people, I'm like, you talk about it that day, or you can always table it to the next day, but it can't go longer than that, and you move on.
And
And
I'll represent the men on this, and we'll be stereotypical one more time. Is the big thing with men and women in conflict with women is often what we consider disproportional response.
Mm.
In other words, I did something, I screwed up, I understand, but why is this such a big deal? And it's not because we're not thinking 2 or 3 moves down the road, or we didn't intend to be uncaring towards you. We didn't intend to hurt you. We didn't intend to make you feel neglected. We just screwed up on this thing, you know? So, all right. So, and of course, another thing with men is, okay, so let's fix it.
right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep, exactly.
But with women, sometimes the response is disproportional because it means so much more to them than what the guy thinks it means.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right. Well, that's the whole communication thing right there.
Mhm.
But again, you can't get to the bottom of it if you're going to approach it in a negative way. You have to try to figure out a way to put a positive spin on it.
Right.
And sometimes it means, like Lou was just saying, relationships are like teams, right? And when you're on a team, you expect the other person to pick up the slack or take the ball to the end zone or whatever, right? And that you've got each other's back. And sometimes I think when we spend our time having negative communication with our friends instead of positively trying to have a conversation with our spouse, things go sideways, right? Like the time it took you to have a 1-hour conversation with your friend about your spouse, you could have driven down to Dunkin' Donuts, bought them a $2 coffee and brought it back.
Yep.
Right. Or, you know, in my case, because we both work at home now, you know, go downstairs and while I'm making my salad, make him a salad. Like, it's not a big deal. Like, it's the same head of lettuce. But those kinds of things go a long way. And, you know, even if the person isn't used to like thanking you out loud, they're probably thinking it inside. Right. And over time, you can win that person back and have more conversations, you know, but start with the actions, because how many times do people accuse us of, yeah, well, your actions are speaking louder than words. So we have these arguments or discussions, and then your actions don't feel very loving. So you have to, if you're going to improve your marriage, you have to think of things that you can literally physically do as an action. And like Katrina said, even if it's like, hey, have a nice day, or thanks, or, you know, when you start a positive conversation, try to say, please, you know, like sometimes I'll think ahead and I'll say, can we please, hey, can we please, whatever it is.
I think one of the problems is negative actions last longer than positive actions. In other words, if there's a dish in the sink, it can stay there for a couple of days, especially if it becomes a hill that everyone's going to die on. I'm not washing that dish. And, you know, it just lingers for a long period of time. Whereas if you make somebody a salad or you make them bring them a cup of coffee, that's great. And, you know, everyone loves it. And then, you know, half an hour later, it's kind of forgotten and you're just walking by that dish in the sink again. So,
right. So we're coming up on time, and we want to cover the 5th one. So again, we're talking about these 5 wonderful things that every spouse can do now as we go into the holidays, you know, and as we get ready for our January 19th webinar, so that people can come and get more, you know, tips and tricks and really get into some of the details. But the 5th one is boundaries. And, you know, we're going to try to give you some information on that that'll help you get through possibly some of the difficult times with the holidays, either with in-laws or this, you know, the pressure to buy lots of gifts or whatever those things are that are building up, and you know, you're not on the same page about. So you want to talk a little bit about that, Katrina?
Well, I was going to ask you to explain what boundaries are and how to create them, especially during the holidays.
Yeah. So boundaries is really what I call an act of assertiveness. And if people don't know what your boundaries and limitations are, they can't guess, right? We've talked about that, how men and women tend to like, we either feel that our spouse should just know these things. Well, they should just know me well enough to know that.
Yeah.
Or they feel like they've got it, but the person never looks happy. So then they're like, I don't get it. Like, I'm pretty sure like that was the right stuff, but like they still don't seem happy. So instead of getting ourselves all twisted up, it's important to just think about ourselves, because a boundary is like a fence around your property. So when we think of boundaries in a real estate term, it's your property lines, it's your meets and bounds, as we call it in the real estate law. It's literally like a fence. And inside that fence is a house and a yard, and that's you. Like, picture that as like you are one with you are one with the grass. So the yard is you, and the boundaries are there to protect you in all different areas. So it's your heart, it's your emotions, it's your mind, and it's also your physical being. And nobody knows like your grass versus the other neighbor's grass unless you tell them what that is. All they know is that there's a fence, but like if you don't tell them what can and can't go through the fence, they're just going to go through the fence with everything. And that's going into our boundaries. So this says, these things can come into my side of the fence. These other things, I don't want. These don't work for me. Those stay on the other side. Those stay out in the street. And unless we verbalize them and talk to our partner about that, they're not going to know what those are. So an example for boundaries is I'm okay with discussing our upcoming Hanukkah and Christmas problems or issues with our families and the details of those holidays, but I'm not okay with you just inviting people before you talk with me. So that's a big boundary. It says, I really want to entertain this year again. I really love your family. I just want to make sure that we're on the same page about when it starts and when it ends.
Mm-hmm.
And that creates a boundary. It's like, don't just tell everybody that they're here for 10 hours because at 8 o'clock at night, I'm going to turn into a pumpkin. Another thing is, if you feel like financially it's going to be a stretch and you personally don't want to dip into your IRA, that's perfectly legit. It's actually wise not to do that, just so that little Billy has $1,000 worth of gifts. You have that conversation. And again, it's a boundary. Hey, going into the Christmas season, I'm looking at our savings and things, and I don't think it would be smart to, take out of our IRA because we're going to have a big tax hit. What I would suggest is, so have some ideas, because you have to give them ideas. And let's talk about that. How can we do things a little bit differently? Or, sometimes that happens with an ex as well. So when we have an ex, you really don't want to have Bob buying little Billy $1,000 worth of gifts, and then me here buying little Billy $1,000 worth of gifts. It's like two households doesn't mean $2,000 or $3,000 worth of gifts. And so with exes, I tell people have those conversations as well. But in a marriage, it's really important to have those parameters, or there it goes. Aunt Susie's arriving at 8 a.m.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right?
Right.
And so I think that's important. But the boundaries without consequences is also a lesson. So we talk about my boundaries, and I don't want your family here until like noon because I just want to have us.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think part of it is certain boundaries. You can say, look, no offense, but if Aunt Betty shows up at 8 a.m., it's your aunt and you own it. You're going to have to tell her to like go home and come back in 4 hours, because I'm not going to get into this again with Betty. Yeah. Because everybody's got a Betty in their family or an Uncle Bob. And so whoever owns the relative has to have those conversations. Don't make the wife who's not related or the husband that's not related have those conversations. And that's a hard one too, Katrina, because we already know like the reason why Betty keeps showing up is because Bob stinks at being assertive, and Bob isn't good at telling Betty to quit doing that.
Exactly.
But
and so it's easy.
Consequence.
It's easy to use the spouse as a scapegoat.
Right.
Well, my husband doesn't want you to come over.
Yeah.
Right. Right. And it's really just fair game. And I think like Lou was explaining or saying a little while ago, when you were coming in and out, he said it's like a team. And
yes, great analogy.
Right. And when we're talking about positive communication, you can start with a positive. Hey, I've been thinking about the holidays. I'm super excited. It looks like everybody still wants to come over this year. That's great. I just want to talk about Betty. Right. So like if there is that problem relative, it's really important with the holidays coming up. We just got over Thanksgiving. Let's get the future ones under control, because you're just going to hold that grudge now for another year. Right. And so I think it's important to have those conversations. And And you have to have a consequence though, because a boundary says, Betty, I don't want your relatives here before noon. And the consequence is maybe, look, if they show up, I don't want to have to be the bad guy, but if I have to be the bad cop, I'm going to have to just say to them, look, we can't do this before noon.
I'll be the male representative again here.
Right. What is it?
It goes back that men are simple creatures. We don't normally see the boundaries, right? It's perfectly acceptable for you to come up and say, look, this is what I want. And if you do it in a non-confrontive way, you're going to get a positive response. And the guy likes to understand he doesn't want to cross that boundary. He doesn't want to mess up. And the guy wants the path of least resistance. Most of us don't necessarily want conflict. So I'd like to know what your expectations are, what your boundaries are, what's important to you. And then I can respect it and do that. I like doing it that way, but men don't think on the same level that women think on. We're different people.
That's right.
So a lot of times if a guy crosses your boundary, I guarantee he didn't know that was a boundary.
That's true.
Right.
So, be clear about it, and don't be confrontive about it, because men, as I've said, Katrina, on the show a couple times, when you attack someone, there's only two options for that person. One is to retaliate, attack back, and the other is to circle the wagons, to shut down. And neither one of those is productive. So attacking people is hardly effective conflict. Just lay out your boundaries. Like, look, I don't want Aunt Betty here at 8 a.m.
Right.
Fine, no problem. I can deal with that.
Absolutely.
Right. And also, like, the positive wording is, I'd like to really enjoy family time. So that's a positive spin. I'd really like to enjoy more family time with our 3 kids this year, and really stick to our 12 o'clock time frame. In fact, if we know that Betty or certain people are always late or always early, then accommodate a little bit. So you're like, well, you know what? Your family's always late. So why don't we just say 11 a.m. and then they'll show up at 2. So like, at least we know we're eating at 2. But sometimes you have to accommodate like the times, knowing that certain people are either always early or usually most people are late, right? Or, you say, look, I love having our families over. I'm really excited. I love Christmas Day. But it feels to me like we're sometimes, because I've seen this happen, it feels to me like we're all sitting down with like 13 people and we're short some food. And I think it's because we keep assigning food to people, and then, no offense, but your sister Jane keeps showing up with like a small bag of cookies. It's like, okay, 6 really cool chocolate chip cookies is not going to be enough for 13 people.
Yeah.
So I think we should switch around the assignments, because Jane can't really screw up snacks. And, snacks and appetizers, we don't really want them to eat a ton anyway. Just give her that, because who cares if it's a bag of chips and a tub of dip, Don't give her something major like the side dish that we all are hoping will be a good sized portion of, maple glazed carrots, and you get like 6 carrots.
Yep.
True.
Right.
True.
So you have to have a backup plan, is what I'm saying. Right. Or suggest changes in the holidays. Let's do this instead. That kind of thing. I mean, and sometimes I think with the holidays, it's exhausting, because you usually have your immediate family and then extended family and friends come over later. And that is a long day for the people that are hosting it. So maybe you say, look, Christmas morning takes till like 10:30 or 11. Let's not have people here at noon. Let's tell them to come at 2. So we get a little rest, get to have our 3rd cup of coffee, and the kids can play with their games alone for a couple of hours, and then the cousins come over at 2. Right? So that's kind of a maneuvering through the holiday conversations.
All right, we're up against the clock here.
We're up against the clock.
Yeah. All right. Well, this has been great. And our 5 suggestions were hope versus despair, responsibility and respect, positive communication, love is an action, and having boundaries.
That's right. And we're so excited that you were able to come on the show today, Katrina.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. And we want to remind people that January 19th, that evening, actually, it's probably afternoon for California time, but in the evening, we'll be having our webinar. It's only going to be an hour. It's going to be packed full of great information. Maybe I should even give them the name of our webinar because it's pretty
Yeah.
cool. Can these dead bones in my marriage live again?
Ooh. Wow. I like it.
Yep.
Right.
That's a good one, isn't it? It's a whole visual right there.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
So that's
All
what we'll be
right.
doing. And you can get in touch with Katrina or myself to register. Again, we're going to have a cutoff. And so we'll have to put extra people into another session, maybe, a week or two later.
Yep.
But we don't want it to be too big because then we won't be able to hear from people. We want to hear their stories so that we can address them specifically with our, with the topics that we're going to be covering. 5 more topics, even cooler. Not just these, 5 more topics.
Excellent.
So that will be fun. But anyway, thanks so much for coming on, Katrina.
Thanks for
Love
having
having you
me.
here. And maybe you can come back in January, right before we
Yeah.
do our webinar.
I think it's a great idea.
Oh, great. Thank you.
And then we can take this episode and share it all across Facebook as well, but which we can do with this one because this will be archived in a few hours.
It's up on Facebook now and available for everybody. Yeah.
Right.
Okay, great.
So it's available here on Coach Judith
All
on the
right.
page that we're running it. And then you can go in, click on it, share it away. And I think the more people see it, the better because you don't always see everybody's feed on day one. I mean, I just saw something from like 3 days ago. I'm like, geez, what's with this Facebook thing? The last one to see that post.
Off the
Uh-oh.
bed. All right.
Saved by the
Thank
bell.
you. Thank you so much, Lou, for
All right.
orchestrating. Thank you, Judith.
All
Guys,
right.
Have a great
Take
day.
care.
Okay.
All right. Everybody, be well, be healthy. We'll see you next week.